we have to understand one very basic fact, that this is the realm of duality. The framework of living is duality. Duality of every conceivable kind, as my spiritual teacher would say. Left and right, up and down, front and back, black and white, pleasure and pain, me and the other, and so on and so forth. This is the framework of living. The polaric opposites. Now, Joel Goldsmith said something very beautiful. The tenet of his teaching was, give up the belief of good and evil. Give up the belief of good and evil. Give up the belief in two powers. What was he pointing at? That if everything is God, there is nothing which is not God. This is very important to understand because it is the tenet of Advaita. All there is consciousness. Everything is God's will. You see, because if there is something which we feel is not God's will, that means we have given something else power over God, that it is so powerful that God has no role to play in it. This is what happens. We create this split. And so it is very important to understand that we are living in duality. That is the framework of life and living. And what happens is the basic duality of life, like me and the other, becomes me versus the other. That is what happens. We create this conflict and fight with people in our lives or with situations and events that happen in our life, and we thus give it power. You see, as masters like Nisargadatta Maharaj have said, we are already imprisoned in this body, in this limited form. Consciousness so vast has got imprisoned. And Rameshji would say that what we tend to do is convert the simple imprisonment of life, which is imprisoned by duality, into rigorous imprisonment. How? By creating suffering for ourselves as well as others. Because if I am blaming, condemning, hating, judging, criticizing others or myself for something they are supposed to have done, then I have surely converted simple imprisonment to rigorous imprisonment. Because I have created so much psychological suffering for myself and others. So when we accept that in life everything has its polaric opposite, because that is the nature of life, we no longer swing to the extremes of these polaric opposites. You see, the pendulum, if you hold it at one end, it swings widely to the other end. That is the polaric opposite. We find ourselves swinging from pleasure to pain, pleasure to pain. As Maharaj said, between every two pains is a pleasure. You see, no one has a life of pleasure, 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 pleasure. It is everyone's life experience that life is pleasure one moment, pain one moment. So the still point of the pendulum is when it is not swinging wildly between these polaric opposites, this dance of duality. That is why the wisdom teachings are there for us. When we see and live these teachings, we are no longer swayed by what happens in life like we were earlier. I'm reminded of a story, I think I read it in one of Osho's books, of one prince. I forget the prince's name. It's a beautiful story. And he had all the luxuries of life, all the luxuries, a life of excess. And suddenly he woke up one day and said, "What is this Maya Jal I'm stuck in?" And he went extreme, a life of austerity, of nothing, minimalist, not meeting people, nothing. He really started shrinking, He went right to the extreme end. And then he went to the Buddha. His parents took him. I might have got the story wrong, but this is the essence of it. And he loved playing a musical instrument. So the Buddha got an instrument and asked the prince. He said, "Now tell me, this instrument is beautifully perfect, all the strings are aligned beautifully. Now I will make them all loose." All the strings were made loose. And he asked the prince, "Can you play some music for me now?" He said, "Of course not. How can I? You made everything loose." All right. Then he tightened all the strings, severely tightened them. And he asked the prince, "Can you play some music?" He said, "Certainly not. How can I? You made it so tight, it's not even moving a fraction." So this is what he said. So life is the middle path, not these extremes, too tight or too loose. The middle path. So when we find that this basic structure of duality, we are no longer swayed by it, choosing one extreme over the other, but accepting this as the design of life, we find that we are walking the middle path. We are less judgmental. We are criticizing less. We are condemning less. Blaming less. We have lesser pride and arrogance. And we find that this framework of duality is honored for what it is understood for what it is, and a mind which is no longer swinging wildly like the pendulum is a mind at peace. And that is why Sai Baba has said, perhaps if it interests you, you could read my first article on Sai Baba's teachings, Sai Baba and the Hidden Jewel of Advaita, where I've taken Baba's Advaitic sayings. And that whole article is about that. It's in the description, you might find the link. And if you could reflect on that, you will find this essence, because after all, Baba says, remove the barrier that separates you from me. Which means what? This duality. For example, if you see me, as in Baba, in everyone, that polaric opposite is being removed. If you see everyone as Baba's creation, you are no longer going to swing like the pendulum, hating some people and loving others. You start developing a sense of neutrality, accepting God's creation the way He made it, not the way you think it should have been made. It reminds me, this example of the pendulum reminds me of the first chapter in the Satcharita of the grinding of the wheat. I mean, you could look at the wheat as our lives, we are being ground between the stones of duality. But it is the center which is unmoved. That is the still point. That is what I was referring to as when the pendulum is at rest. And it is not swinging wildly. And so, once again, we find such an important lesson right at the beginning of the Satcharita. That is the beauty, you see. It operates at so many levels. We may read a story once, we get one understanding of it. We read it another time, we get another understanding of it. Each point in that story has so much meaning in any story in that book. After all, it is the Sat Charita. Sat is truth.